Seraphine woke up before the sun. She always did. 3 years of palace life had trained her body to rise in the dark, dress in silence, and move through the cold stone corridors before any noble had opened their eyes. She did not mind this. In fact, she preferred it. The palace in the early morning was a different place, quieter, more honest, stripped of its performance. She pulled her gray servant's dress over her shoulders, tied her dark hair back, and picked up the stack of fresh linens from the shelf beside her bed. The room she slept in was small. One window, one candle, one chair. She had never asked for anything more. She walked the corridor toward the east wing, her footsteps making almost no sound on the marble floor. She passed 2 guards who did not look at her. She passed a junior courtier who was rushing somewhere important and nearly knocked her over without a word of apology. She passed a large painting of the royal family, gold frame, proud faces, oil on canvas, and, like every morning, she did not stop to look at it. She had work to do. The Palace of Valdor was a magnificent place. Its towers rose above the city like stone fingers reaching toward the sky. Its halls were wide enough for 8 men to walk side by side. Chandeliers hung from every ceiling, and the floors were so polished that on a clear day you could see your own reflection in them. Visitors from other kingdoms said it was the most beautiful building they had ever entered. Seraphine had learned to see past the beauty. She had learned to notice other things instead. Which doors were always locked, and which were left carelessly open. Which council members arrived early to their meetings, and which ones arrived late, whispering. Which guards were attentive, and which ones let their attention wander after the 3rd hour of a long shift. She had been watching for 3 years. She had not wasted a single day. To everyone in the palace, she was simply the quiet servant. Not unfriendly, not troublesome, not memorable. She cleaned the rooms assigned to her, she served at dinners when called upon, and she disappeared into the background the moment her tasks were complete. Other servants had nicknames for each other, small friendships, shared complaints about the difficult ones among the noble class. Seraphine was kind to them all, but she never stayed long enough to become close. She could not afford to. Closeness led to questions, and questions led to answers she was not ready to give. Her name, her full name, was something she carried alone, like a coin kept at the bottom of a deep pocket. It was on a Thursday evening, at the Grand Autumn Feast, that King Aldrich Valdor first noticed her. Or rather, he noticed her the way a person notices a piece of furniture that has been moved slightly out of place, not with interest, but with mild irritation. Seraphine had been replacing a candelabra near the head table. It was a perfectly ordinary task. The wax had burned low, and the flame needed to be transferred to a fresh stand before the light failed during the main course. She had done it dozens of times before, but this time, her elbow caught the edge of a water pitcher and it tilted, sending a small stream of water across the polished floor, just inches from the king's boot. The room did not go silent. It was not dramatic, but the king looked up, and his eyes found her, and he smiled, not warmly, but with the particular amusement of a man who finds something slightly ridiculous. "Did you see that?" he said to the man beside him. Lord Fenwick, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Even the walls have more presence than that one." There was light laughter, easy laughter, the kind that costs nothing and forgets itself within seconds. Seraphine crouched and placed her cloth against the floor, cleaning the spill with calm, even strokes. Then she stood, straightened the candelabra, and looked up. Just once. For exactly 1 second, her eyes met the king's. Then she turned and walked out of the room, and the feast continued as if she had never been there at all. In the servants' quarters that night, she lifted a loose tile near the base of the far wall. Beneath it was a flat leather journal, worn at the corners from years of careful handling. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote by candlelight. She wrote quickly, in small and precise handwriting, the way her father had taught her. Her father, General Caspian Ashvale, had believed that information written down was information that could not be stolen from your memory. He had kept his own journals his entire military career. He had shown her how. She was 9 years old when he first sat her at his desk and said, "Seraphine, the most powerful thing in any room is not the loudest voice, it is the clearest mind." She wrote what she had heard at the feast, not the laughter. That was not important. What was important was the conversation she had caught, very briefly, between Lord Fenwick and Chancellor Grave, while carrying dishes past the side corridor near the hall's eastern entrance. 3 sentences, just 3, but 3 sentences that confirmed something she had been watching for 7 months. She closed the journal, she placed it back beneath the tile, she blew out the candle and lay down in the dark. She thought about her father. She thought about the morning the soldiers had come to their estate, not as enemies, but as officials, with documents bearing the royal seal. She thought about how her father had read the treaty, the one that stripped their family of their name, their land, their standing, and how he had looked at her over the top of the page with an expression she had never forgotten. Not anger, not collapse, just a deep, tired sadness that said, "I did not see this coming, and I should have." She had made herself a promise at that moment. She would not make the same mistake. She would always see it coming. And 3 weeks later, the Eastern Confederation arrived. Their delegation was large and deliberate. 12 officials in formal gray, led by a thin man named Ambassador Rule, who smiled too much and said too little. The palace received them with ceremony. Banners were hung, meals were prepared, and the full royal council assembled in the grand meeting chamber each morning to discuss terms. Seraphine served tea on the second day. She poured, she listened, the way she always did, eyes forward, breathing even, presence invisible. Conversations around servants were rarely guarded. People assumed that someone carrying a teapot had nothing worth thinking about. This was among the most common mistakes that powerful people made, and over 3 years, Seraphine had found it enormously useful. On the second afternoon, she was collecting cups from a side room adjoining the main chamber when she heard Lord Fenwick speak. He was talking to Chancellor Grave, low and fast, thinking they were completely alone. They were discussing a specific exchange, a northern border stronghold called Fort Arenval, which controlled the only mountain pass into Valdor's most exposed territory. They were discussing giving it away, not losing it, giving it, in exchange for financial agreements that would benefit themselves personally, while the kingdom absorbed the consequences. Seraphine set down the cups without a sound. She stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then she finished collecting the tray and walked away at the same pace she always walked. That night, she wrote for a long time. The decision took her until dawn. She had known, in the back of her mind, that a moment like this would eventually come. The moment when staying invisible was no longer the right choice. She had prepared for it, and yet, when it arrived, it still required her to sit with it in the dark for several hours before she felt ready. She was not afraid of being seen. She was afraid of being seen too soon, or in the wrong way, or by the wrong person. Timing, her father had always said, was the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Knowing something was intelligence. Knowing when to act on it was wisdom. She decided the time had come. She took the journal from beneath the tile and removed 3 pages of particularly important documentation, copied records, dates, names, financial references she had collected over months. She wrapped them carefully, then she took the chain from around her neck. On it hung a small seal, old and heavy, the Ashvale family crest, a hawk in flight above 2 crossed swords. Her father had pressed it into her hand the day the officials came. He had said only, "Keep this. You will know when to use it." She used it that night. She pressed it into the soft wax at the bottom of a letter she wrote in her most careful hand. Then she folded the letter, tucked the pages inside, and walked very quietly to the door of Commander Draven, the head of the Royal Guard, and slid it underneath. She went back to her room. She lay down. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested. Commander Draven had served the Valdorian Royal Guard for 22 years. He had grown up hearing the name Ashvale spoken the way people speak the names of mountains, as something permanent, something reliable, something that had simply always been there and always would be. General Caspian Ashvale had pulled him out of a fallen structure during a military operation in the Eastern Pass when Draven was 31 years old. He had never forgotten it. He had also never forgotten the morning he heard what had happened to the Ashvale family, and the sick, confused feeling it had given him that he had never fully explained to himself. When he opened the letter at 5 in the morning and read the name signed at the bottom, He sat in his chair for a long time without moving. Then he read everything inside. He read it twice. He read certain sections 3 times. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform, and began making quiet arrangements. The great hall filled gradually as the morning session was about to begin. King Aldrich walked in at precisely the appointed hour, as he always did, and took his seat at the head of the chamber. Council members filed in behind him. Lord Fenwick and Chancellor Grave sat in their usual seats, looking confident, which was, Seraphine would later reflect, one of the last things they would feel confident about for a very long time. She was standing near the wall when they all entered, still in her gray servant's dress, still quiet, still, to all appearances, entirely unremarkable. Commander Draven walked in last. Behind him, in 2 straight lines, came 12 senior royal guards in full ceremonial armor. They moved in a way that made the room go still without anyone announcing anything. Draven stopped in the center of the chamber. He placed the journal and the documents on the table. Then, in a voice that was trained to carry across open fields and did not need to be raised, he spoke. He named Lord Fenwick. He named Chancellor Grave. He laid out what Seraphine had documented, supported now by cross-referenced records that 2 trusted archivists had spent the night quietly verifying. He described Fort Arenval. He described what its loss would mean. He described the private financial arrangements and how they had been structured to be invisible to anyone not looking very carefully. The room was completely silent. Then Draven turned to face Seraphine, and he did something that no one in the room expected. He bowed. His spine straightened and then bent forward, slowly and fully, the way men bow only to those they consider worthy of deep respect. Behind him, without hesitation, 11 armored guards did the same. "Your Highness," he said, addressing the king, but his eyes steady and clear. "I present Lady Seraphine Ashvale, daughter of General Caspian Ashvale, rightful heir to the northern reaches, and the woman who has just prevented a betrayal that would have cost this kingdom more than it could have recovered from." King Aldrich stared at her. Seraphine met his eyes, calmly, without hurry, the same way she had for exactly 1 second in the dining hall the night he had laughed. Only this time, she did not look away. Lord Fenwick opened his mouth. 2 guards had him by the arms before the first word was complete. Chancellor Grave looked at the table and said nothing at all. The weeks that followed were orderly and serious. The Eastern Confederation delegation departed without their arrangement. Ambassador Rule, whose smile did not quite reach his eyes on the way out, shook hands with people who were no longer afraid of him. The inquiry was thorough. At the end of it, the forged treaty was declared invalid by royal decree. The Ashvale name was formally restored. The northern reaches were acknowledged in the historical record as having been taken under false documentation. A sentence that was short, dry, and official, and that meant everything. King Aldrich requested a private audience with Seraphine on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after the inquiry concluded. He stood when she entered the room, which was not something he was required to do. They spoke for a long time. The conversation was not recorded, by mutual agreement. What was recorded, in the official court document that followed, was the establishment of a new advisory position, the Royal Strategic Council, an independent seat answerable to no council faction, and held, for the first time in Valdorian history, by someone who had once carried the palace laundry. Seraphine accepted the position. She also kept the habit of waking before the sun. The court historian, an elderly man named Osbert who had been documenting royal affairs for 31 years, asked her once, at the end of a long day, what the hardest part had been. Of all of it. The 3 years of silence, the watching, the waiting. Seraphine thought about it honestly before answering. "Not the waiting," she said. "The waiting was a strategy. The hardest part was the night someone laughed, and I had to decide whether to let it matter." Osbert wrote that down. The guards bowed every time she passed through the halls, not because they were ordered to, because they understood now what they had walked past every morning for 3 years without recognizing. The king no longer laughed at quiet things. He had learned, as everyone in that palace eventually learned, that silence is not the same as emptiness. Sometimes silence is a person who has already decided how the story ends, and is simply waiting for the right moment to begin.